you guys to give me a little bit of a map of that in Aotearoa, how the education can lead to your, like what are the things we can talk specifically about Maori, but overall as a country, like how do we make these two areas not meet or how do we use education in your area? Because rehabilitation is a massive one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that with, what is it, about 11,000 people in the correction system, 8,500 behind the wire and about 3,000 running around with, the digital bracelet on their ankle, you've got to understand that there are some that probably should never, ever come out. That's just the reality of it. So it's knowing that in terms of categorising those people that are incarcerated, realistically how many in terms of the resource available, because that's the thing, there just aren't enough psychologists or case managers or whatever to nurse them through, so the day they walk out of prison they're ready to reintegrate into society, and that's a society that by and large doesn't want them. That's one of the big issues. They walk out and it's kind of like they've got cross on the forehead. So it is very, very tough, the whole reintegration being the way to stop reoffending.
Brando.
It's an interesting one. The institution is the institution.
Yeah.
That's one way of looking at it. Doesn't matter if it's a school, doesn't matter if it's prison. It's the same institution. For myself as an indigene, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And they're also, I don't know if you want to call it symbols of the dysfunction of the society we live in, but our society needs to have a certain, needs an underclass for it to work. That's the way I think that's the way it's set up. And if you're a fourth world, third world, they're all outdated terms, but I still like them. A fourth world person is a person who's a colonised indigene living in their own homeland in third world conditions. And things have changed for the better in Aotearoa for Māori people and other people from the Pacific. But we still have third world stats when it comes to health and other things. And if you're okay with it, it's okay, but people have become more articulate, more vocal, and more unapologetic about saying that is not okay. So in Hauraki itself, if you look at an organisation like Te Korowai Hauora Hauraki, there's a whole bunch of potential in that for that to take over roles that government presently delivers very poorly and has historically for over 180 years. And you can argue in some ways in this particular place for 251 years-ish since Cook landed on these shores. And people can agree with it or disagree with it, but there's a lot of research, there's a lot of writing, there's some opinionation about people's take on stuff, but the institution is the institution. Our institutions are older. They've been here for at least a millennium. And if you go back to most stuff I've read, most people should know something and talk about stuff. We didn't really have a correction system like the one at present, because if you were really, really naughty, then you just got bopped.
Yep.
Short, simple. And then there was a thing where that, if you're naughty, you might get moved onto that branch of a family. You might get moved until eventually you either made space for yourself or you just got pushed out of the spaces that were available. And you could argue that Te Rauparaha and his people, when he moved out of the Waikato region, he was such a talented leader, probably one of the top 2 or 3 thinkers, full stop, but definitely technical thinkers of the 19th century in New Zealand. If you look what that guy accomplished in his time, I think, oh my God, got booted out of the area between Raglan and Kawhia, either fought his way or diplomated his way or just hustled his way all the way down to Otago, and in between he set up a fortress at Kapiti between the North and the South Islands. Nowadays that guy would have been, I'm assuming he'd either be running a company or he'd be running a patched organisation or he'd be behind the scenes. So much talent is wasted in our prisons, and it gets put, and it becomes channeled in ways that don't feed the whānau.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You in terms of the word, the institution, so whether you jump across health, education or corrections, you know, a prison. You're inside this big glass, steel, super secure, pretty much warehouse for people, you know, to keep them in there and pretty much stop them from killing each other. But I still hold the view that it's realistic to believe that Māori could run and operate their own prisons, not too dissimilar to the current situation. So maybe one day we'll be knocking on the door in Wellington and saying, hey, thanks for the last 183, 184 years, we'd like the keys to that prison, we'll take it from here. And, you know, it would be a joint venture where, because a prison still needs to be run operationally excellent. You know, people shouldn't escape and people should not hurt each other or the staff or whatever. But in terms of the programs that are going in there, I think Māori need to find a way to unify and step up and say, you run the prison, we'll run the programs, and we want to measure, you know, like a pilot, how we reintegrate. Because it is this whole thing of too many coming out and then ending up back at some stage, you know, if it's not in year 1 or year 2 or something like that. But having worked inside the prisons and looked around, I am convinced it's doable. It would be a big shift in thinking, though.
When for the institution, maybe not for Māori.
No, that's right. I think there is a forthcoming or a willingness with Māori, but it would be that you're dead right. It would be a big shift of thinking in terms of is New Zealand ready to let that be? You know, particularly with what we've listened to, on the campaign trail and where we are today, particularly with Māori, and there's this sort of whole thing that, you know, we're not a special needs people, or we shouldn't be considered different to anybody else. But the reality is, if you get out a calculator and your times 11,000 incarcerated people in the correction system by about $120,000 to $160,000 a year, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's propped up by Māori. That's a sadness and the reality.
When it comes to the numbers, because I heard that before from people who love that thing of like, it's not all Māori, like there's people from all sorts in the prison. But like when we look, I guess, at the per capita, when we look at the population and the numbers, obviously you're gonna have all sorts of people, all different races in the prison. But like, is it that clear, Vaughan, that we're talking about a majority of Māori in the prisons, or those numbers are actually
You mean the percentage of the prison system being Māori?
Yes.
But the prison system is pretty much Māori. So if you want a percentage, you're talking between 55, 60% of the 11,000 are Māori. So the thick end of 5,000 to 6,000 Māori in there. So, it's the majority of prisoners are of Māori descent. And then you throw Pacifica with that, and it balloons out again, that is the sad reality of it. So it is a part of society that exists on the misery of our people.
And if you look at the big picture internationally, similar statistics in other places and other colonised countries, but also look at America. That's the home of that type of institution, or it's taken it to a pinnacle, if you want to call it a pinnacle. And minorities seem to be stacking it up. There's always those interesting stats that come out and they make you think, and often people are quite opinionated and feel strongly about that type of prison system and rehabilitation as a topic in that, but I don't know how widely read or how well informed people are. Sometimes they just go with the emotion thing. People need a baddie.
Yeah, that's right.
You need you need to label a baddie to make yourself feel better about things, but if you look at the big picture, those statistics that, in the 19th century or 18th century, people would demonise the Irish. Oh, they're bad people, blah, 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 blah. You put it in context now with with hindsight, and you can say, I can see how that happened. People talk about the Irish potato famine. It wasn't a famine. It was a planned genocide.
Yeah.
And there's reasons why people turn to alcohol and things like that. In New Zealand, at least, the descendants of Irish aren't those people clogging up prisons, and they don't have that reputation anymore. We're the new Irish, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And it might be someone else at another time, but it's still, to me, it's still indicative of a broken system that thrives on dysfunction.
Yeah.
It's Babylon system.
Yeah.
It's a vampire. It's vampiric and it feeds on something.
Yeah, and so I think that from here, Māori will need to be taking some ownership for what happens inside the correction system. Is the government of the day ready to embrace that as an idea? I think the prison should still be contracted out to someone to run a brilliant operational model.
I was wondering that's your take on that.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in a private partnership.
But
where,
why? Is the government not capable enough to make it?
I don't think governments should be in the business of operating institutions. I think governments should let, so for example, I'm not saying that corrections do a bad job. I'm saying you want an expert at operating a machine, and then you want to lay on that the program. So you don't want Māori coming in and having to learn how to be experts, how to run a prison. And by and large, this prison won't be the same as today's. You know, if Māori sat down with a clean sheet of paper and said, let's design a prison that would be, well received by Māori prisoners, how would that look and work? And how would it then, you would get a prison operator say, well, you're going to have to make some changes here because, there'd be weaknesses, whatever. I think that's a realistic view. To do. I think Waikaria has kind of tried to go down that track, but if we are more than half of all prisoners and there's 18 prisons, it only stands to reason we should probably have a couple of our own. And as a pilot, show us how you would do it. Right?
Am I wrong to think that by the moment that you make it private, that you give that business, let's say, to a company, am I wrong to think that company will do all that it can to keep that alive?
To maximize profit.
It's a business. It is a business, absolutely.
It's
complicated because it means that you need more inmates or not. That's why I'm wondering, is that right to think like that?
I tend to think, I sway more to the left, for lack of a better word, because you've got such a high inmate proportion of inmates that are Māori, but you've also got a high proportion of Māori and Pasifika people that work in the prisons, and I think that we could run our prisons because a lot of the time we may not necessarily be in as many managerial positions as we could be. I have a lot of relations that work in corrections, and it's not a joke, but partly it's because a large proportion of our iwi are the clientele, and I agree with you talking about you need expertise to run a prison. If you're running it like a machine, but I'd move away from the idea of running a machine. What we're experts in is people.
That's right.
And there's that thing too where people talk about, Māoris in prison, this many Māoris. What's a Māori? A lot of the time you may find that a large proportion of those Māori inmates in prison don't know a lot about their Māoriness. That's a function of the machine and the institution. There may be a large degree of disconnectivity, and that I'd argue is also a function of the institution or the machine. And I'd also argue that sometimes ones that have been able to find their way back home or back to Hawaii have done it when they finally get that connectivity. There's a vested interest in the colonising institution to separate people from who they are, what they are. And I'm not trying to romanticise it and say before Pākehās came everything was lovely. We know that's bullshit and it's just being silly. But if anyone has a lot of experience in the prison system and may have things to suggest about how we can make it better, I'd suggest it would be the people that have the highest participation rate.
The client base. It's like pretty much Māori are the biggest customer of the prison system, Māori Pasifika combined. And I think I'm a believer that operational excellence is just the machine, no hearts and souls, no people. Once you put the prisoner in there, so therefore the reintegration programs would belong to Māori, right? The running of the prison on a day-to-day basis would belong to the operator. And so we have one private prison in
New
Zealand.
Who might be Māori and might not be. All you want is the best dude that can do it.
That's right. That's right. Who tenders the best to do that? Yeah. And you'd have to give them a big contract and last for a long time to make it worthwhile for them to get a return on that investment. But I don't think that
profit-wise, but they're also they bring returns for society because they do what they say they're going to do, and they do it well.
Yeah,
and they serve the people as well.
And having been behind the wire for a little while now and enough to look at it, I've gone home many times and thought, what would a prison look like if I could design it? And and it would be because no two prisons are really the same in the sense when you look at maximum security and minimum security and the different types of prisons, right? We have 2 women's prisons and 16 men's, so therefore they have to kind of reflect the inmate. But the prisons do need to evolve. That's a reality. But I'd have to say that, the one that I work at...
is it minimum or high, the one that you work
It's got quite it goes from high down to minimum.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not maximum. Pāre mōremo is maximum. And so Kohuora, where I work in South Auckland, has got a wide variety of prisoners, but I'm actually impressed with the prison. I think that it's not a horrible place to be. It's now what happens when the prisoner is in prison. And that's the bit where you look at it. And some of the Māori programs going on there are actually inspiring. They really are. But, inspiring is one thing. What happens when they leave? Will we see you again?
What we don't see, what we always, because it's easy to judge, the prison, all the criminals. What we don't see, what's happening there. Like, can you describe me a day in the prison, or like a week? Like what kind of activities, what's going on?
A day behind the wire in a prison is like being on another planet, because you can't take any communications in with you, right? So your phone stays in the car park, you go behind the wire in the prison and you're focused, and it's very exhaustive because there's a lot of mental. You've got to be spatially aware of who you're talking to, what you're with, obviously safety and security, that side of it. But that operational excellence I talk about, the fundamentals I see is that you want to make sure no one escapes, no one hurts each other, the staff are safe, the prisoners are safe, they're moving around the prison, they're fed, they're medicated. So it's like a... and actually, when I say medicated, not only is corrections a prison system, it's probably New Zealand's biggest mental health ward. A lot of people behind the wire there are struggling psychologically. And you've got that gap where you might have Mason Clinic in Auckland, but there's nothing in between. So there's a lot of people that are in prison that probably shouldn't really be there, but there isn't another place you can put them. So they are there because that's the holding pen for them. That's just the reality.
Man, I feel like that's probably one of the hardest things for humans to accept, that the people who are there, maybe they didn't want to hurt. Maybe they didn't want to commit that crime. There was a back story, there was something that happened that triggered that person. Maybe it was even a reaction or something that they couldn't deal with.
That's spot on.
Now they're there, probably could be getting even worse because they might be dealing with someone who did something heavier, and now there's an influence. So the mental health...
Draw parallels with, Dickens, poorhouses.
Yeah.
Ordinary people fall on bad luck, you end up at shit street, and that's a necessary function of the type of society that we live in. If you're going to transform or evolve the type of prisons that we have, you need to evolve. It has to be everything at once, all the time. It can't be just that thing and that thing, it's everything, because the institution is the institution. The culture of surveillance that someone like Michel Foucault talked about, the idea of, there was a point in European history where people would talk about crazy people as being touched by the hand of God, and then all of a sudden they were bodies to be checked out, and there's something wrong with them, and maybe we can fix them and maybe we can't. There's a culture of behind the wire, as you keep talking about, but there's also a culture of attitudes of society itself too, that it's in some people's interest to separate yourself, but as a Māori, if I'm looking through a wire, through a window or a door, there's my relation on the other side, and there go I, but for the grace of God, that's me.
Yeah, and that's such a spot on thing.
Those are sons.
Yep.
Those are fathers. Yep. Those are brothers. Those are sisters.
So when you look at, let's say there's 5,000 Māori behind the wire in the prison system right now, just to pick a round number, people understand. They are not only in prison, their whakapapa is in there with them. So you're probably talking a representative portion of society that's 10 times that. At least, that are behind the wire, because someone comes to visit them, someone is probably feeling the hurt and pain. And I'm not talking the whānau of the person in there, also on the victim side. So the impact on society is like an atomic bomb. It just goes out and it has massive tentacles that are invisible. And so for me, you know, it's been very easy to get passionate about corrections in the prison system because our people are keeping the prison system alive. You know,
if you go behind that fence every day, you got to own it.
Yeah.
Whereas someone else that doesn't go behind that wire, it's easy to separate yourself. It, nothing to do with me. That's not true. It's not real.
Yeah, and you know,
have to own it as a society.
And I think something that the public need to know, and you know, when people are watching us having this kōrero about it, I've got an incredible respect for reintegration or corrections officers in all prisons in New Zealand because they literally put themselves at massive risk when they go behind the wire. You don't know that person that's just going to click, and it could be, you know, a gang member, it could be somebody that isn't or whatever. But getting whacked or whatever goes with the territory. It's not what you want to happen, and you know, staff are trained, but they really are in the path of danger every single day, and they're going in there trying to make a difference. And you know, I mentioned the word gang, and obviously that was bandied around as a big topic on the election campaign, and now we're going to see whether the government is going to be successful to get gang members to wear makeup to cover their face tattoos. That's going to be a goodie. You know, I was thinking maybe I should get a makeup brand from overseas for gangs. You know, I think it'd be a good little sideline hustle.
Or for politicians, shiny bald heads.
But you know, the gang community, because you know, the whole removal of patches, and you know, I'm no fan for what gangs represent, but you know, we don't want to be picking fights that didn't need to be picked.
And also people forget that sometimes if you got a family, if I know, and they got a pet, sometimes they were the better ones to look after those kids or brothers or sisters or whatever, because sometimes, you know, it's if you went back to the 50s, these are good people, those are bad people. But we know, and for instance, with the findings of the special committee that was put up around Oranga Tamariki and the history of the institutions, a lot of the time the shiniest, squeakiest, cleanest looking people were the biggest assholes out, and they should have been behind the wire, but they were the ones that were running the places, and that's a problem. It's the face of the institution, and as an Indigenous person, the face of the institution tends to be white, if not by ethnicity, then definitely by culture. But I'd argue that if we look back and we take a big, if we've got people that are experts in that area and they can say, this tends to happen, don't do that crap, that tends to happen, don't do that crap, because I'd argue that in education, schools are just an extension of prisons because it's still the institution. Teachers go to work in some classrooms, they're putting themselves in the same types of risk. Because we're not dealing with their problems, we're not owning it, and sometimes people don't even want to talk about it because it's ugly, it's bad for reputation and stuff like that. The institution is the institution.
Yeah, and you know, this is not something that happened yesterday, right? So Māori is a significant proportion of the prison population, has been around for some decades now, and you know, the statistic, there was the Ombudsman Peter Bourchier did a paper on corrections, and I thought it was very good, and there was an infographic which showed that, you know, if you are brought up in a family where one of the parents, if they are still together, offended, you are 9 times more likely to offend yourself. So the generational, you know, how you reverse that trend, and look, that statistic could be swapped over to education. You know, if you're brought up in an environment where the parents didn't value education, the kids are probably less likely, you know, to be motivated to want to better and exceed themselves in some field. And I, that's relevant to me because, you know, my mum and my dad worked multiple jobs so we could go to good schools and hard out. They actually sacrificed their life to give us a life. I know that for a fact. And, you know, that's something that was in their values, and as a parent, you know, that's the same thing, that you'll willingly do anything. And that's privilege.
Do you feel like you picked on that for your way of raising your children? We were talking about that just before the show. Do you feel like you were inspired by your parents to work your ass off?
The commitment to give them the good opportunity via education came from a parental role model thing. I wasn't one of those parents that demanded standards or results or anything like that. It was really important for me that my boys felt no pressure from me, that I wanted to see them evolve into what they would be with no pressure. So there was no helicopter parenting or anything like that, which, the part of New Zealand I live in, that's kind of goes with the norm, where there's kind of like a fed to the rules, hit the ground running for the kids, where they kind of like a little baby version of their daddy sort of thing, or their mummy, sort of thing, or both. And that's not said, bitterly. That's just a reality of how we've evolved as a society, where the parents kind of sometimes are too hands-on with the kids. Because whilst I say that about my mum and dad, I still had a great upbringing. I was really naughty and stole bikes and got into fights and tried to pinch lollies from the shop and all that sort of stuff. And
probably got a tune up afterwards if you.
The beatings from mum were mainly a stare. She could pretty much bring you to tears with the stare. Had no dinner and straight to your room and all that sort of stuff. And you did it. You didn't argue, man. So it's interesting times, and I think that look at where we are today, right? And what happened today,
Vaughan, what happened today?
Well, to me, what happened today, I believe, was an own goal for a certain member of government. But coming back to what happened,
three-headed monster.
That's the three-headed monster, and a funny-looking monster too. But the reality is, in terms of Māori, we're more unified today than I've seen since 2004 Foreshore and Seabed Act. Right, that's that. Helen. That
it was the ultimate policy release, because everyone that turned out today in their own centres said, we all agree with this stuff, and we're just letting you fellas know this is where it is. Yeah. And it's neat too, because it's just a reaffirmation and reasserting what was put out when the Takutai Moana bill went out, the four seashore, for blah, 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 thingy-majingy. What was put out on the table at a whole bunch of other times through history, that was articulated in haka and waiata and other things for almost 2 centuries, and what was on the table or on the ground or on the mat or whatever at Waitangi, when a bunch of Ngāpuhi chiefs said, we're going to sort this stuff out, and then it went around and people said, I can go with it. Still the same 3 main principles.
But in terms of that backstory about really your question, what happened today, the reality is we got this like turd in the punch bowl called the treaty referendum, right? And it's like, it really is a booer. And so I guess the starting point for me is clearly we're not
smoothie.
but why on God's earth would Māori be remotely interested in the Te Tiriti being rewritten by the descendants of the people who have breached it consistently for 183 years? It's kind of like, you got to be kidding me. So therefore, right at that point, there is no trust to even come to the table and have any kōrero about that.
Well, the whole conversation is definitely a conversation of one treaty partner, 2 parts of itself. There's no dialogue going on between, And when you're talking about we are one nation, and this is the one language we're all going to communicate in, and these are the convictions that we're all going to stick to, because they tend to be the ones that the majority do. But when the treaty was signed, Taui, we weren't the majority, not by far.
And so Māori do not need to earn the trust of the Crown. It's the other way around. And that is the issue there. So therefore, rewriting Te Tiriti suits who. And I think that, look, the treaty's a flawed document, but it is taonga. Our ancestors signed it, and we're going to stick to it. It's like,
I don't know if it's flawed.
Well,
the Māori language version isn't flawed.
Well, put it this way.
It's what people do with it is flawed.
I guess what my point about it being flawed, have you ever met a Pākehā who could articulate to you the articles 1, 2 and 3? Most don't even know what those are. So to me, the flawed part is that whilst in the education system, Te Tiriti is here, and every company will say we subscribe to the values of Te Tiriti, but they don't walk it. I think that for me, with Te Tiriti, we're going to make it work. We are, it's almost like it's the birth certificate of our country. Who goes and changes their birth certificate?
But what's important in that is it's the birth certificate of the country and the way things work, but it's not the birth certificate of my rights as an Indigenous person, because all the treaty is saying this is what you had before we came, assuming it's going to stay the same kind of way, but everyone acts like rights that Indigenous people have in this country come from the treaty. They don't. They come from our old people. We're pre-treaty people.
Yeah, and in terms of the learning, I think the fantastic thing about the referendum, and I'll get on to why I think it's an own goal for the government, is that
spectacular one.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You know, the beautiful weaving that happened today. What happened today? You know, Māori really came together as people. We truly are one. but you know, the thing about Te Tiriti and where we go from here, I'm sure that David Seymour might actually be a genius. I think that his ancestors whispered in his ear one night and said, David, you can unite all Māori. You need to use reverse psychology. What you need to do is challenge Te Tiriti, and they will come together as one. You will be the sacrificial martyr, and you will be burnt at the stake like Guy Fawkes, but your people will be one.
Maybe.
You know? So, kia ora, David.
He must have hit the ayahuasca one night. He's been channeling ever since.
So you know, that own goal, he took one for the team. It's like, God bless that dude.
Wow.
Yeah, he can't do.
That's what I was thinking, and that's what I wanted to ask both of you. It's not easy to digest changes in government when you strongly like believe that one side is better than the other, but like knowing how to look into the, like having that perspective of like, hey, this might hurt, but it could play on our side as well.
I don't see that much. In one way, people can say, oh, would it be better going with the red Tories rather than the blue Tories? But a Tory's a Tory. And that's why people that turned out today, they did it at the call of people always going, oh, it's not a political party, it's a movement. Te Pāti Māori is not it's the Pate, but it's a movement as well. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't blue or red that turned out today. It was Brown versus the Crown, and it was red, white, and
that, you know, the Brown versus the Crown is a hell of a strapline, because what I will find, for example, you know, if you want to find what would by and large be primarily a redneck social platform, go to LinkedIn. Right? And if you write something about Te Tiriti, so I'll bang on about Te Tiriti being a partnership, and you'll get some dude coming, oh, it's not a partnership, you know, when was a partnership, tell me, and so therefore you've got this mental block. But the thing is, I'm thinking, actually, am I even bothering communicating with you? Because it's not between you and me, it's between Māori and the Crown. So you can get lost, sort of thing, and that is the reality.
It's also between our great-grandchildren and that fella's or fallese's grandchildren. The whole, what I like when they put the call out and people were kept on referencing, when you look at social media, people say, is this for real? Is this for real? And from the official side of Te Pāti Māori, the call went out, and I don't know if mainstream New Zealand understands how networks work with any minority, I don't want to say minority, but for lack of a better thing, minority, and that could be the Maris Brothers Old Boys networks, it could be an AGS or an Auckland Boys Grammar network, the same type of thing. These are tribes that we're talking about, and that was a tribal call that went out. Yeah, it was a national hui, but these are just the people, and it sounds kind of corny and a bit flaky, but I like the movement. It is a movement, and so today, what happened today was the flame of hope was truly lit for Māori. And, you know, so driving up in the car, it took about 4 hours to get here. I was thinking, you know, there's some good stuff going on, because I was listening to talk back in the news, and I thought, man, this is a perfect start, because this is just day one, right? We were just warming up. We're doing our stretches before we go into the paddock. You know, things get real. But to me, I visualised it like, for Māori, and who we are as Māori, as a line in the sand. Not a bad pre-game haka. Awesome. You know, there's a good vibe. There's a real good feeling like we got this. And in terms of that line in the sand and the kaupapa here, in terms of TOITU Te Tiriti, you know, the honour Te Tiriti, the line in the sand is on this side will be the kaupapa of that, and on the other side will be, and, you know, I don't want it to be divisive for Māori, but it's kaupapa versus kupapa. That to me, it's like kupapa. Kupapa means to stoop, and it's a word that was used for tribes that fought with the Crown against. So weaponising Māori against Māori, and so you will find often political parties will put a brown face in the front window and go, look how diverse we are. It's kind of like, but that's all it is. It just so happens to be an MP with a whakapapa, as opposed to someone that walks it.
as a Māori. And that's been going on for decades. That's not today. That's all day, every day in politics.
Is it a responsibility, or is it worth it trying to bring these Māori that maybe voted for the people who are making these laws and these ideas of kind of going against what you would expect they would raise Māori culture, and is it worth it going there and
what's a Māori?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There you go.
People will say, oh, blah, 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 blah. I work in education, and people will say, oh, there aren't enough Māori parents backing the idea that you have for this unit or this Māori Lens unit or whatever, or this initiative and so on. But if people have been exposed to 3 to 5 generations of colonisation and getting a particular message and being undercut on the tripod thing of your spiritual base, you eradicate that, education, mātauranga, you eradicate that, and the other thing you eradicate is people's military capacity. That's the machinery for that biting end of colonisation. George Grey, by the time he came back to New Zealand, he was the mechanic for the British Empire. That was his job. He was a troubleshooter, and he was very, very good at it. And as Indigenous people, we have historians, we have other people, we have oral traditions. We know how the processes work. Everyone knows how the processes work, it seems, except the descendants of those colonisers themselves. And the really funny thing is, a lot of the time, all we're talking about is the people themselves aren't the thing. It's just if people deal with each other for real, rather than investing in unhelpful labels
yeah.
We talk about the institution, but the institution is a bunch of people behind the facade. Remove the facade, it's about the people.
Yeah, and do you remember, I remember the last time I was up here on this show about a year ago, and we talked about this and what possibly could happen. And, I think I said something like, well, if there's a change in government, the pendulum is going to swing back very hard against Māori and poor. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. And so, my God, it probably has swung back much harder than I anticipated it to be. But the movement thing for Māori, I've changed politically where my views are neither left or right. It's now what is the movement?
It's Māori.
Hard out.
Your views are Māori.
Yeah, and that's what happened today, is that. And what is beautiful about it, Te Iwi and Pakeha are also subscribing to that. There are many non-Māori that were part of that today.
Allies.
And always have been.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's not just, an exclusively Māori situation. It's something of you resonate. That stimulates you. And that's what is beautiful about it, which means that is the taonga of Te Tiriti working 183 years later. And so, get your stinky little hands off it, and we are here to protect it.
Vaughan, for someone who is actually interested, because I remember chatting with you, and I follow your pages, like you know what the parties are up to. You study their proposals and their policies. Do you think it could also be a thing that, on purpose or not, takes the attention of all the shit that it might be going on under the carpet, especially with international relationships that the governments could be, you know what I mean? There's a classic political thing of like, hey, look here. And then
money runs the world, not political parties.
Yeah, look, I think that's possible, but I don't think we're that good. Seriously, when you look at what's going on in Wellington, I think most politicians go in there with a sincere intent to make a difference. But the problem with politics, and particularly Wellington, if you run around the halls of Wellington and the bureaucracy, it takes good blood and turns it into bad blood over time. So you'll see damn good people go down there, and all of a sudden they come out as just another politician, man. And so, in terms of my interest in politics, I don't have a political view left or right now. I absolutely don't. I'm looking at what is right for where we go, because we talk about this, we're one people, which is crap. We've never been one people. But today gave me belief that we could be. Absolutely could be.
Or if not one people, in that sense, there's a vibe. I like taking it back to environmental sustainability. There are things we do that are good for a sustainable future, and there are things that aren't. And if that's your main organising principle, then there's a whole bunch of stuff that this government and other governments want to put into motion that they're just not good.
Well, the thing then, that's the sustainability. That, like, our current country as we've got it today is not sustainable, right? Our infrastructure is falling apart. Shit flows into the sea, and that's the human shit. Then you talk at the cow shit, that flows into the ponds, and that because we're one big dairy farm, right? Yep. That's not sustainable. So we've spent 183 years turning God's own into
banking shit.
Yeah, hard out. And so and some people just can't get their head around that is actually a reality. So something's got to give sooner or later. And so that was the whole thing about the resistance to co-governance that really stuck in my craw, was we're the handbrake that looks at it and goes, life is not all about GDP and, how much flows to the bottom line. Because often when that's rocking, you've still got those that completely miss all of that. When we've got a rock star economy, we've also got a growing poor base. If you look at what's happened in the last 2 decades, where property values have done this and people have been left behind, because it seems to be that we've led to believe the only way you can survive in New Zealand is by getting on the property ladder, which is a rubbish notion. But unfortunately,
great propaganda, though.
It's an easy trigger and lever to pull politically, and we're going down that track again. And like the Pied Piper, we'll follow it again. So we're in a really interesting time. But I think the beautiful thing about it is there is a lot of good kōrero going on. I think people are wising up. A lot of
good people. One of the pluses I got out of today and last night in preparation for today was just cool vibe and cool communication from young people. It's nice to see young people getting interested in, because you know what the participation rates for young people are, because it's a bit dry and stinking bum crack, but it's good to see people being about something. If nothing else,
and
that's a good idea.
In terms of, and don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm a fanboy, but the genius of David Seymour, I actually believe the own goal, and it was a goal that was worth 100 points, not just one goal. But I actually believe with his canning of the Productivity Commission, that productivity what? And you talk to anyone young, they're not interested in productivity. They're interested in a lifestyle that actually nourishes them, because productivity is basically get costs down, get profit up, and who walks away with that? Not the workers. That's productivity in today's world. And so that's just draconian thinking, and those sorts of things have got to be challenged. So I think that the young coming through, and we've seen it, Te Pati Māori, particularly with Tākata Wheres and Hana. Oh man,
shout out!
Yeah, and you had Hori here the other. There are inspiring people coming through that you look at it and man, we don't need to sweat it. We've got the right people in the right places. And that's the cool thing. Right across our economy, it's not like it's been led by a person. It's being led in many different areas, whether it's the creatives or whatever. It's exciting times for us. I actually am not worried about, because I certainly didn't vote for this government. I couldn't bring myself to it. So my vote went to Te Pati Māori. I looked at top, and I thought they had a lot of potential, but, for obvious reasons, Te Pati Māori was, that movement, we have to get the numbers and we have to weave together. And, hopefully that momentum has begun and it's not going to turn back.
It's kind of a nice revisit to the early 80s too, when the band Aotearoa released that song Marangake Ai, and it was banned on Radio New Zealand. And all it was saying was, there's a movement on the street, wake up Māori people, now's the time. And that time has been every time something has come up since then, and it was also the times that was happening before that. Very cool. And in terms of the local area, Big Chief Judge Walla Walla Joe Williams is from Manaia.
Yeah.
Well, he's Ngāti Pūkenga, more than Maketu in, but he's uncle to, he's got strong connections to the Hauraki area. And if you look at some of the young people that are coming through, not just from our kura, but just in general, from Merk Bay, I was getting messages from kids from there, and I'm talking kids that are in their early to mid, some heading into their late terms. I just thought, this is cool, because I grew up in the 80s, and it was a time where it was a bit trendy. Young ones was the thing, and, you'd be archetypes, people would be Rick, or there'd be Neil, or there'd be this or that. That was a good thing, but I just felt there was a bit of a gross slump, and the ship was dead in the water for some time because people just become disenfranchised and they don't engage in politics. What I suspect a lot of people engaged in today wasn't necessarily politics, it was a social movement, And that has power, it has lasting power, because it's about the people, literally.
Yeah.
It sounds corny, but it's real.
Yeah, yeah. And, there was a line I saw randomly Googling the other day, which was, to not think in evolutionary terms is to not think at all. And that's how I think about Te Tiriti, is we should never give up on making that original document work. And I think the rear view mirror approach that's been taken, particularly by the current coalition, to even entertain a first reading of a possible referendum on Tiriti is such an offence to Māori. It's like we already have the document and we need to stay at it.
It's more an excess of evil than a coalition, isn't it?
I mean, if our Prime Minister did have hair, it would have all fallen out in the first week, because he must wonder, how am I going to make this work when, you have 2 out of the 3 that probably can't stand being in the same room together.
That's a bugger of a horse to ride, eh? How do you stay on that saddle?
Yeah.
Well, facing backwards. Yeah.
You're saving Uncle so far.
Sorry, what's that?
Uncle Peters. You saving him? Are you saving something for later? For Uncle. I don't hear much. I don't hear much about him, because I'll just tell you my perspective from a foreigner, from someone who is just starting to be more interested in Aotearoa's politics. Like, I'm a resident, I can vote, so for me it's interesting to be aware of what's going on. I always had the impression that he's the guy running the game, because the last elections that I saw, he was the one giving the last call. He was the one that everybody was like, "Oh, what is Uncle doing?" And he's got that face that you cannot actually tell what he's up to, like he's all mysterious and shit. So, what's up with Uncle?
You are talking about Winston, eh?
Yeah. Am I too close to him to call him Uncle?
Yeah.
It's because someone stopped me at the street the other day and said, "Did you vote for the Uncle?" I'm like, "Who is Uncle?" He's like, "Peterson."
All joking aside, if we go back to the campaign trail and the tired old sort of divisive rhetoric, some of the stuff around Indigenous and things like that, I was rolling my eyes and thinking, how did it come to this? Where
Again.
Yeah, again. And that.
But so full blown, it was so early mid 70s. I just thought, I didn't expect it would get that retro that fast.
But
on the back of Trump.
There is a part of me is that if you were to say there is a voice of reason of some sort in that government, I'd probably look at him before anywhere else.
Interesting.
Because
what did you call a voice of reason?
Yeah.
Also a voice of shrewd.
Yeah,
he's a hustler.
Well,
he's a street smart. He knows what he's doing. He's a survivor, man.
He stood the test of time.
There's things about his politics that absolutely abhor me, but what I like him, he ain't dumb, he's witty, he's articulate, and he's Uncle Winston.
That's right. And if
because of his Māori whakapapa, not the other stuff, but
if you had to do the dark alley test, which one of those 3 would you go down a dark alley with? Winston would come out dripping in diamonds and gold, right? The other 2 you would never see again. And it's and so that's the thing about Winston. Who are you going to take with you, into the gunfight? And you're always going to take Winston.
I don't disbelieve that they're all upright men and they may invest in their values and stuff. Some of the stuff I definitely don't agree with, but some of the stuff that came out of the end, the bum end of this election, were just so retro and unthinking and stupid and uncritical. It was embarrassing. All the stuff starting to happen with climate people and scientists, but it was just embarrassing. I just felt embarrassed, not even in a cool embarrassing way, in a in terms of this first 100 days rhetoric, and we're 10 odd days in and you're looking at it and go, my God, what next? It's great entertainment, in terms of the media are having a field day. Hey, 100 days wasn't that a zombie apocalypse movie? Was they 100 days? There you go. But
in terms of both, there were 2 parties that used the let's get New Zealand back on track and let's take New Zealand back to the 1950s, sort of thing. Yeah, that's right. Let's take New Zealand back 5 decades,
or the 1850s.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, that was the bit that they left off the end, and I think that. There's a lesson for the New Zealand public in that we will learn. Look, I sort of think that we probably did need a change at the last election because the other guys were kind of capitulating.
Agreed.
So I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with the change. It's where do we go from here? And
Do
I think
something with it.
that's right.
It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Don't waste
so
it.
it's a shot across our bow. And I think that this is a holding pattern that we're in at the moment. And
But all the stuff that's following out, like the things that happened today, that's good. You rip a muscle, you let it heal, and it comes back
yeah,
better.
yeah. But but Māori have been famous for being very fragmented and not on the same page for a long time. And so today was the closest that we got that we all had a common goal. And so I honestly felt really proud, and I think that a shout out has to be given to JT John Tamaheri here, because if you look at Te Pāti Māori after the 2000 well, if you look at Te Pāti Māori after the 2017 election, they were all but dead. The only thing they didn't have was a headstone, in the urapa on them. They were gone, and somehow the party was resurrected, and 100%, had JT not come along, Te Pāti Māori would not be here today. That is as simple as that. So, to me, the recognition he needs, and you can tell that he is the driver behind that party.
Or a driver.
And what, it's almost like the rebuilding of the Warriors or something, in terms of up the wires. If you look at Te Pāti Māori and the talent that they've actually got in that party, and we're just beginning. It's like there is a hell of a lot of confidence of the future of that party, and it's not a political party; it is a movement. That is the key differentiator.
Another way of looking at it too is when we speak about it in English, we say it's not a this, it's not a that, but in Māori, it's whānau.
Yeah,
and I like because the premise of everything they do is about our mokopuna. This is a mokopuna driven kaupapa.
Yeah.
That's sustainability.
Yeah.
By another name.
Yeah. And one of the things that used to really stick in my craw prior to the election is I'd go in and you'd read through the constitutional of each party and look at what they stood for. And it was, the three parties that are in power now do not have in their constitution that they will honour Te Tiriti. So there are only three parties in New Zealand that have that in their constitution. It's Te Pāti Māori, Top and Green. They're the only three that say that. And that fundamentally, to me, is the issue. It's all very well to write there that we will uphold and we will recognise, but I could say that I recognise that that's a camera over there, but I don't want anything to do with the bloody thing. It's the words that matter, and will honour are fundamental.
Guys, sorry if it's I think there's no stupid question, especially from someone who it's not very familiar with the political landscape of New Zealand, but of Aotearoa. When we talk about the power that politicians have, do they actually have the power to mess with the treaty, or there's a I don't know the words, there's a group that it's above that, and because for example in Brazil you have the politicians, but they won't be as important as the guys in court, the legislative, how does that play in Aotearoa?
Well, the power that they have is that they've got it on the table as a discussion topic, which can become a referendum. They do have that power, right? That to nurse it through that journey, and I'm sure that Chris Luxon, Prime Minister, and Winston Peters were going, let's just take it to this stage, it won't go any further. But that's why I call it the turd in the punch bowl, because it's still the steaming thing on the table the whole time. It needed to be gone. And so when they negotiated, we'll give you two of these and one of those, and they somehow formed a coalition government, the topic should never, ever have got past, it should never have popped out of the womb of wherever it came from, in terms of that idea. It's a stinker of an idea. I think so. Just going back to your question about the power, all they can do is support, the idea. Right, it's still got to go through quite a process, and a referendum is a big thing. But a referendum, it would win, right? Because we're only 16% of the population, so Māori are not going to win any referendum any day of the week.
I don't know if there are a lot of non-Māori people that think, we need to have a discussion. Well, the discussion's been happening since the early 70s, isn't it? And the people that have been having that discussion on their behalf and sharing it with us have been people that have been trained for that and at the top of their game, world authorities and what they're doing. And like you're saying, you're playing silly bugger games with rhetoric and stuff like this, but not just for Māori, but for other people, the treaty is New Zealand.
Yeah, yeah. And so
don't fuck with. There's some things that have to be sacrosanct.
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with particulars of the stuff, it's the idea of nationhood comes out of their document. That's it, and people can say, no, it's not.
Yeah,
they're wrong.
Yeah, and I think that it must be hard for a lot of Māori who are in the bureaucracy, who are not speaking up because they don't want to bite the hand that feeds, which is, and it's really tough when you use a word like kupapa in terms of working for the other side. And I think that the mucking with the treaty, it's like this is something that you just do not do. And that's what happened today. And the irony is, man, the silver lining in the cloud is the unification of Māori.
Well,
we've been waiting for this.
Māori have drawn a line in the sand. No, we didn't.
You did.
The axis of evil did.
Hard
they
out.
drew a line in the sand, and so now there's a bunch of people on one side of the line, and we're not going to break that line.
No. And so I think that there is a reality of I don't think that the referendum will happen. It's just we shouldn't even be having this podcast about it tonight. That's the reality. It shouldn't have got that far. And I think that it's almost like if you feel that there are wolves at the gate, you don't ignore them, and that's what we've got at the moment. The vultures are milling around,
and that the boy that cried wolf, and the Russians are coming. It's funny to a point, and then it's not funny. It's either dangerous or it's just painful.
Yeah.
Again,
yeah.
Brandon, for someone who is into history and knows a good bit about it, do you feel like this global tendency of extreme right wings governments, is it the end of it, you reckon? Is it like a last breath, like all the generations really trying their best to hold that power, but like with technology and things changing and the priority of young people understanding that we're fucking up the world, do you feel like that there's kind of like a last...
Death throes.
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about death throes?
Yeah, of like so many countries putting extreme right wings politicians.
I think there's public domain theatre, but the real movement of power is the stuff that we'll never be party to necessarily. The stuff that we're exposed to is theatre, and that's small scale stuff. But at the end of the day, and it sounds corny, we'll either get it right or we won't get it right. We'll have a planet in 200 years or we won't. But I still have faith in COVID, just that 6 weeks where we were doing things differently and people weren't going out on the sea and stuff, and just seeing how animal species and plant species just came into their own. They're fine. The non-tampering thing was a goodie. You could argue that, maybe it's the death throes of capitalism or a certain way of doing things that got us quick gains, but now we're having to pay the bill for it. It's like global level, what Think Big did for New Zealand in the 70s, we're still paying the bills now. Maybe this is the same type of thing on a global scale, but I don't know, because I'm just me and I'm only a little thing, but I just want to have faith in people, and that's all I can do, because at the end of the day, my sphere of influence is this big, but at the end of the day, if a bunch of people align these spheres of influence,
I don't think the left or the right thing is such a big deal for me. There'll always be, in terms of philosophical thinking, the diametrically opposed.
And it's biodiversity.
Yeah,
if you
that's
don't
right.
have it in an environment,
That's
it's
right.
really unhealthy.
So in terms of,
and I think the kickback from this right-wing government was too much heavy-handed, unintelligent application of stuff. And a lot of times, say, look, with BLM in the States and other things like that, sometimes the bam stuff that's happened around Māori things, it wasn't Māoris holding the stick, it was liberal middle class white people that were going bam, this is my pepeha, blah, 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 blah. Wasn't the people themselves. There's a lot of that adopting and appropriation of shit, but at the end of the day, you got to have a spectrum, you have to have diversity and things like that. And if this government fell down on one thing, it's because they didn't have a flavour. Their flavour wasn't that different from these guys, and these guys are new, and they also seemed impassioned, and I'm sure that they generally saw some stuff that just needed to be zonked, but there's a tail of slag or poopy water or whatever you want to call it that comes with it that's a bit distasteful and things. But I don't have a problem with people having rigorous discussion, as long as it doesn't break into violence and stupidity and chaos. But if we're not constantly letting off steam and having challenging conversations, then we're not evolving, are we?
Yeah, I think that the issue is not so much the left and the right globally. It's those countries that have a colonisation history of dealing with, and in this case, the brown elephant in the room, right? So it doesn't matter who's in government. How do you deal with this problem that's 180?
And also that government is the face of an institution that has gotten fat and powerful by exploiting the human resource and the natural resources of those places that they colonised. That's why they're there.
Yeah. Because, what we've seen in the last week is the suggestion that those...
bodies for cancer.
Government departments that branded and used the reo to sort of reinvent, and you could argue whether there was much sincerity in that, but they did it. And so to pull down these signs and go down that track, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. So therefore, while we're at it, let's get the kōru off Air New Zealand. Let's stop the haka for the All Blacks. And in fact, don't come to Waitangi on the 6th of February too, because when the world looks at New Zealand, they don't see the crown. They see Māori, right? So let's just get that out of there and have a look at what your vanilla ice cream looks like now. And I think that's what happened today.
Point of difference. What's their flavour? Yeah. That's the flavour.
So the IP, the intellectual, the capital, the currency of New Zealand is Māori. It is. That's what the rest of the world are coming all the way around the world to see. And I'm speaking from a mother with Scottish heritage and a father with Māori heritage. But the reason why the Māori is such a drive for me is that goes back 50 generations. But, the settlers go back 4, 5, 6, maybe, if they're lucky.
And your 50 generations are unique to this place. And they can only be in this place.
So, and in terms of, I think my mum would be smiling down on me now because she married a Māori because she loved him and she loved the way,
and what you just described was a treaty.
Yeah,
that's what the treaty
that was the treaty partnership working. Yeah. And, Māori men are easy to marry because we're friggin' awesome. We are the unicorns of the planet. After, you have a Māori man, none of the man will do. So that's kind of like, but, all joking aside, there is something about what we've got here, and this is what I think is taken for granted, where there are people that will stand for the All Blacks at the World Cup final and struggle through the national anthem, first in the reo and then in English, and watch the haka and get all vibed up. But then, boo, on the treaty and, sort of thing. It's kind of like, and this is the stuff we've got to fix, It's the hypocritical
and
nature.
People, the hand that don't bite the hand that feeds you, sometimes it's a white hand that's feeding, but often it's a brown one, but it's not recognised.
That's right.
Officially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if you talk about beneficiaries dragging the country down and exploiting and speculating, well, we were here first.
But in terms of sustainability as a nation, the current situation we've had in this first 10 days of government, that's not a 3-year sustainable model. It's not doable. The public are going to really struggle with it. So hopefully there's a settling in period and they can get on and do, because they're not devoid of good ideas. There's stuff that we've got to let them do.
Or intelligence.
That's right.
They just got to stop slinging shit.
That's right. Yeah. And it's like the division in our country. We are now in the most divisive time in our history. It's you could talk about Springboks, you could talk about seabed, but today this is the most divisive time that we've ever been in our history. So, politicians,
perhaps barring the land wars, perhaps.
The land,
perhaps.
Oh no, most definitely. That's a whole. But I think in our lifetimes, there's nothing that's like this. We've got a responsibility from a leadership perspective to not stimulate that, but to actually step up.
To feed the whānau.
Yeah, that's right. Step up as Māori and do the right thing for everyone. And then we can start looking at, we are one people. We are one people. I have many Pākehā friends. They are not racist. They're probably a little misinformed or they don't see things the same way as me. But that's not their fault. That's the life that they've lived.
Probably both got some Māori ones like that too, but people's people.
Yeah, yeah.
No one's perfect.
Okay.
Don't be a dick, but people are people.
Yeah, yeah.
How is the education scene in this story, Brandon?
In relation to the government and what it's
in relation
to do?
Because in my view, and just a segue of what you're saying, like education is key.
Yeah.
If you know your history, if you know what the treaty is all about, if you know the roots of how everything started and where we are now, for me, goes back to education. So if we can prepare the kids and then explain to them that early, they will have that in mind. Although 95% of the kids that come to the drums room say that school is boring, but it's still.
I don't necessarily have a strong opinion about that, but I have an opinion, and the opinion is that education is the face of the institution. There's a vested interest in the institution, educating people. It's not, I won't call it education, I'd call it more socialisation or acculturalisation, and everyone studies it, I guess, when you become a teacher, but the studies go back to the 50s, and as far as I know, they're being redone at least every decade, and I'm not very au fait with the last 2 or 3 decades, but there was the guy that had this criteria for what genius is, and he did tests that were age appropriate to different ages of kids. 90-something% of kids qualify as geniuses at the age of 2. And the longer they stay at school, the quicker that drops until the percentage drops way, way down here. That's our education system. That's its job. Its job is to put out docile people that fit within the machine that's generated in its productivity. And it's not necessarily a good thing. And a lot of the time, the types of thinkers or as an indigene, education needs to be an active revolution. If it's not transformational. You're doing the same old shit. And, every teacher's studied Paulo Freire, pedagogy of the oppressed, and all that kind of stuff where, there's that maxim that knowledge is power. But as an indigene, we often turn it on its head and say, no, power is knowledge. When people are in power, they legitimize what's valid and what's not. So people coming in and say, that treaty, that's not valid, blah, blah, blah. That's people with power redefining the truth. That's alt facts. That's bullshits. And that's a problem. But we have the internet. We don't need schools. Schools are a business like prisons. They make some people money. Some do better, some don't. Some do it in this way, some do it in that way. But I think the country would be a lot healthier, and the globe would be a lot healthier if education was still seated in whānau and community first, and it was about learning basic, not talking about it, because the type of stuff you described before with government departments going along with a thing because they have to do it under compulsion, but they don't necessarily believe in it. It's a tick box. You can say the same thing with a lot of stuff that happens in education. The kids can do this, and this. They can't. Not true. So just getting back to basics. Be kind, be respectful, all of those basic things. And I think the terms are very Western, and I'd suggest that they're also quite Eurocentric, but people on the left don't disagree with that stuff. People on the right don't disagree with that stuff. So why don't we look at all the stuff that we agree on and push ahead with that? But you shouldn't have to, come up with the next super bulldozer to go over the top. One of the problems we have with education globally, but particularly in this country, the changeovers that happen when a new government comes into power, you need some continuity. You need a cumulative good being a continual, ongoing thing. People could just agree on some basic stuff and don't screw with it.
But
it's not helpful.
I went through, even though my parents worked 2 jobs to keep me in good schools, and my brothers, I was hands down, I jokingly say a straight E student. I was probably the dimmest guy in the class according to the curriculum at that time. But and then you leave school and you find out that I'm not dumb, sort of thing, and you start, making gains and doing well and becoming successful.
Would
and
you say
look back
that your ability to do what you did in later life, there was it was informed a lot by by what you were exposed to when you were at that school?
I went through the education system believing that, I was pretty thick because that was the way that you were either 100% down to 0. So I was in the bottom. However, I lived in a household where my parents would never subscribe to that. You especially, so they would focus on your strengths and make you feel good about stuff. So you found out what you were good at because you had people in your life that loved you. And so they would not let you think that.
And we're buying into that deficit narrative.
That narrative.
Because they knew it was toxic.
Yeah, and so I was often thinking, man, if I was going around again, I probably wouldn't necessarily be motivated to have my kids in school. but you would have to have a structured environment
Yeah.
for them to be in that was this, the surrogate or the replacement for that, and that's the bit to look at. I would definitely think again, because no disrespect to the private schooling system that my kids went through, but
We have
what
internet.
yeah, hard out. But they come out of it with actually a network. That's what, they just got mates and they're all going the same. So they create their peers and all that sort of stuff. The actual marks and what they do is a sideshow to the whole damn thing. It's a participation certificate.
For my experience in my family, or my mother's family at least, similar to my father's family, I'm the third generation that have gone through Western education. My great-grandfather was a tewhitiite. He was a pariaka person, and he followed tewhiti o rongo mai. He was from South Taranaki, and at a time, later in the movement's time, when a lot of people left following both prophets, and they went more with tohu, te kakahi, my great-grandfather never stopped wearing the raukura, which was a symbol of tewhiti. And I've got one surviving granduncle, and he remembers the police came 9 times. You have to let your children go to the school. And he just remembers his father saying, I don't want my children to go to your school, because then they won't be my children anymore. You'll make them into your children.
Yeah.
They'll forget who I am, and they'll forget who I am. And very to the point, he knew what he was talking about. And you'll find with people on the West Coast, Waikato and Taranaki, compared to people on the East. And it's a fairly broad generalisation. But in places where people were quick to take up European education and mixed in well, they did very well out of it. Most of the songs from that 60s, 70s era that people know from schools are East Coast schools, because they were East Coast teachers that flooded the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were as accomplished in English as they were in Māori, and they did well out of it, and they prospered in the greater world, whereas it may have taken a bit longer for people in those other places, because my great-grandfather wouldn't let his children go to school. The older ones didn't want to, but his eldest girl would sneak the younger 7 children to school. First time he found out, he'd give her a hiding, and she might be immobile for a week or 2.
Yep.
And it got to a point where he hated, and he'd be crying and said, I can't do this anymore to my girl, and he just gave up and let her sneak them. Her thing was she didn't want her siblings to grow up and be a dumb Māori like her. She wanted them to have opportunities, and they did. By Western standards, they did well, and they did these things, and they had opportunities and stuff like that. But my grandmother, who was at the top end of those younger 7 children, 14, just said she was the Māori, and what she knew in her little toe is more than we all knew.
Yeah.
And our 7 bodies together. And that's a picture of what a change from a parent's generation to the next generation. And so even though we were pushed to do well at school and all those types of things, there was always that idea of resistance that you find in kingitanga families, that you find with people from Pariaka, you find it with Ratana families. On my father's side, they were ringatu, followers of Te Kōtirikirangi, so they may have had, by comparison, it was easier for them to connect in some ways with European education. The raupatu that happened in the Mātātua region in the East Coast, that was a biggie for us. I won't go on and on about it, but people forget that we haven't been embedded in the system for that long. Yeah. And so when people use words and language that assume that this is our system and we're part of it, it's not. It's Babylon. Tauiwi, the word that we use for people that came, that aren't of Māori descent or came after the treaty, it's also a word we use for the Gentile. Yeah. If we align ourselves with the chosen of Israel, and then we look at other people as Gentiles, we don't do it, hopefully we're not doing it in a Zionist kind of Gaza Strip kind of way at the moment, but not that long. A lot has happened in a short amount of time, and part of the reason we're motivated to do things, part of the reason the word unapologetic gets bandied around so much now, since the song and other things, is because New Zealand may not be ready for certain changes, but we were ready a long time ago, and we're sick of taking shit. Yep. No more shit. Yep. That's what today was about. That line in the sand that someone else drew. Yep. We're saying, bro, we've been here, we've been trying, off on a hand journey together, but fuck's sake, enough's enough. And
I think, you mentioned Gaza Strip, and I've often thought, with Ukraine recently and now what's going on over in the Middle East, and with our great history with Māori Battalion, there is absolutely no way I would support Māori fighting for New Zealand anywhere in the world right now. The next Māori battalion, so to speak, will be fought here on our own shores, and that will be the unification. So what's happened today, don't worry about what's going on in the rest of the world. Worry about what's going on in our backyard.
I wanted to ask you that. Do you think it can get violent? It could.
In terms of spilt blood? In terms... God forbid, right? So fundamentally, that's not what...
because we're little and villagey,
Yeah.
but the world's changed really quickly around us, and things that, like for me, growing up, I'd feel discombobulated and alienated from people because they would drink coffee, because that's American, but we grew up drinking cups of tea. And this is a colonised indigene saying, because we're British, ironically, ridiculously if you want to, but just but the stuff, the influences that we have, the rate of change and stuff, geez, but
what we saw today was a peaceful resistance protest or retaliation or whatever you want to call it, but there was nothing that was aggressive or violent about it, but it could easily go from stage 1 to stage 2 and seismic very quickly. I think the danger is the perfect storm being the government has come in slinging shit in the direction of all the wrong places. So TIRITI, gangs, and so this kaupapa today, TIRITI, could easily be weaponised. And all of a sudden...
What's behind all of those labels? Treaties, gangs, this thing, that thing, all of those things, what people said today, all those things say Māori.
Yep.
Say what you mean.
Yep. Yeah, and it's, in terms of the collateral...
And you may not know that's what you actually mean, and you may not know that's what you're signifying from yourself to us as the signified, but you got to think about the sign, the signified, and the signifier. Because because we're non-Westerners sometimes, and we're Westerners others, we get to swap. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do not support gangs. I wish that we didn't have such a thing in society. However, the way the government used it, sorry, not the government, some politicians, used it as a political football. When was the last time there was news that a gang shot a fat, rich white guy? They don't do that, right? Their war is with themselves, but it's the fat rich white guy. It's kind of like saying gangs are bad, blah, blah, blah. That, and how many of those politicians, and I'm not labelling any particular politician as being a fat rich white guy, but what I'm doing is trying to create this profile that the people that were talking smack about the gangs have never sat in a gang headquarters or never met with any gang members. They're talking remotely from a plush suburb somewhere in Auckland or in Christchurch about something that is a world they've never ever been into.
Some of them may have, but the gang doms that they're rolling with have chauffeurs, have European cars, and wear suits, Italian suits. And those are gangs.
That's right. And so which politician talked about white collar crime? And, those people that stole money that ruined the retirement of thousands of people.
20, 30 million a pop.
That's right.
200 hours with a Rolex sitting at home.
That's right.
That's not true.
And that's so there's kind of like a double standard thing in and around that's really disappointing. And that's not a political criticism. That's actually just disappointment to see in the way that politicians behave to stimulate a few votes. And it's also saying that voters by and large are pretty thick. When it comes to election day, they don't really think things through. I
feel like, do you think some of the lower class in Aotearoa might feel like a bit desperate when they realize that there's this instruction of like, oh, let's get ourselves together, but let's be peaceful, let's give it time. But at the same time, I don't think it will take long for the pockets of these people to hurt even more with the taxes and the laws for like the landlords and all those things.
I don't even know if it's what you'd call lower socio-economic. I think a lot of middle class people are just scratching to get by.
And that's the key thing is that
those are the votes everyone was chasing.
Whether we want to call it that people are on the bones of their ass, which can be middle class and down.
We have an impoverished middle class.
Most of them have got too many fires in their own kitchen of their own home of how they're going to cover rent and feed the kids to worry about anything political. And so therefore they will just go with the flow. They'll look at it and it'll be a split decision. Oh, shit, that's not right, I'll go with it.
And the campaign that was run this time by the Blue Tories, it was slick.
Yeah.
They knew how to channel those tides and they knew how to bring people with them. They're the people that actively engage in that stuff. and they're into it, and they may believe it out of conviction, or they may go with it because it's advantageous to their own agendas. But like you said, a whole bunch of people will just go with that flow because it's just the way that things, it's the way the world works.
But I do feel the last government coughed it up because they went pretty hot and heavy on some initiatives in and around Māori, such as Māori Health, and there were, whether we want to look at hei pūpū or co-governance, then they got the spooks. And they pulled back.
I don't even know if they did. I think that may have been their Māori caucus driving it from inside and behind to an extent. And they, because of the way the game plays, they can't be seen to be not going with it because, anti-daki, blah, 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 blah. But it was a Labour government that introduced neoliberal economics to this country. And that's what it is. And like, Helen back in the day when Tūria across the floor, haters and wreckers, blah, blah, blah. What a crock of shit. Same thing. Labour was old, and they know they're old, and there has been, and they weren't up to game, and so new team came on board. But God, I wish they'd come up with something a bit more inspiring and entertaining. I don't want to watch Northern Hemisphere rugby. I want to watch our style of rugby. I want to see a ball getting chucked around on the field, and I want to see everyone scoring. Yeah,
and so in terms of the old guard of the red team and the blue team, they've definitely got some soul searching to do for the next election, because this is one of the last elections where the boomers and the old farts will push the blue team across the line, or Winston across the line. The young are coming through, and we've seen that because the number of seats that Te Pāti Māori got, if you really look at their party vote, it wasn't that great. But they won the seats hands down. So they did it the right way. They jumped into the ring and they won the fight on the day. If they can get their party vote up to around 5%, you're talking a real presence in Parliament. So that's their challenge in the next 3 years, is to get people to give, party vote to Pāti Māori. And
when I invited you to the show back, Vaughan, we had a chat on the phone, and I was asking you, watching one of the debates where Marama and Doc are like, there's a cool respect there and a lot of acknowledgement, going back and forth. And I asked you, I was like, why don't these guys get together? Like, why there's no sort of like clear, and then you told me like politics are way more complicated than that. Why?
Yeah, but the reality is that, because actually I will give credit to Marama. She was on form in those debates. She actually found another gear that I didn't know she had, and so she really did perform. I was really impressed with her performance in those political leader debates. However, when you look at Tākata, he's on strong legs, man, and so therefore he's got a massive drive in terms of ancestors on his shoulders, and is fearless in that arena. So he becomes somebody else when lights, camera, action goes on. That's what I believe anyway. But coming back to why can't they get together, the true thing to me is that the real Green Party in New Zealand should be Te Pāti Māori. If anyone's supposed to look after our whenua, it's Māori.
And vice versa.
Yeah, hard out. And so in terms of them getting together, just drop the green shirt and jump on this waka, and we can call it a deal. So I think Green have a bit of an identity crisis they have to deal with, and I look at them and think that really, if it was me, I'd certainly be putting Chloe as the leader of that party.
Maybe I think it's coming, eh? Maybe it is already coming.
Well, they look tight from the outside, but I look at it and go, if you wanted to get new voters, fresh voters, and that, I would be pushing her forward. But there's probably stuff in there that I don't understand as to why they're not going to do that. And often in politics, leaders are not going to relinquish the baubles of power too easily. It's often ugly when it happens,
and it's because they're a political party, not a movement.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's the beautiful thing is about that Te Pāti Māori being a movement. That's exciting, because you can be part of it and know that you're not nailing the shirt colour above your door, that, I stand for this. And this is that old thinking that you literally can't, the blue and the red teams literally lived on other sides of the streets. That's the way New Zealand was. It's almost like this side of Hamilton is Catholic and that side is Anglican, that sort of stuff. That's how our society's been built.
Literally, a place like Aotearoa, this wave of people move out, so they bring in another wave of people. West Auckland, Fees, their steel mill. And they vote accordingly.
And so there's still that sort of generational thinking, but it's breaking down really, really fast. And if we really look at what will be the face of politics in 3 years' time, when we go back to the and to me, if I was I actually think Labour Party is an opportunity for anybody that wants to get into politics, because they've actually been smashed over and their confidence will be in an all-time low.
So it's all about the remake and refresh.
That's right. And so they actually are in an exciting position, where it's clean sheet, look down, and what are we going to look like in 2026? And
the thing too with their baby boomer generation who grew up with working class parents who went through a depression and things like that, that was the identity. But when they became the Pinko Chardonnay socialist generation, what are we doing from here? Because we've all got university educations and we've all done this. And I'm not dissing it. What I'm saying is stuff's changed. What amuses me is that the changes that we're seeing and may continue to see in politics are also reflected in changes in the way patched organisations and non-patched organisations have developed. It's not the same world by any means, and unless you swim in those waters, it's just really hard to make sense of what's happening.
Yeah. So, it's like, but, today was a great day. And so it's going to be interesting what the news is tomorrow. And
Can prisoners vote?
Sorry?
Can prisoners vote?
Some. Yeah, so, and it's a really, in terms of prisoners, because
That's a thing that needs to be discussed further.
It does. Because
when you feel the consequences of stuff that's made by other people in society, have a say.
What makes a yes and a no if they can vote or not, Vaughan?
Well, in terms of the severity of the crime, so there are some where, clearly they're going to reintegrate back into society, so they are treated on that basis. That where there are some, you're in there for good, man, heinous type stuff, so therefore you're stripped of that mana. And in terms of
part of the freshness of an indigenous viewpoint or greenie viewpoint or whatever other type of Altbay kind of thing is, you've been talking about reintegrating people back into society. Well, who says society is such a cool thing that you'd want to be reintegrated back into it anyway if it's part of the problem? What about other pathways that people moving from there can go into? And the return of people to their papakainga, people thinking about papakainga living, marakai living by maramataka. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. I got lots of rallies there on the inside. They were good gardeners before they went in. They're better gardeners now. And they're growing more diverse types of crops than they were previously. Workers too. If you remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, the best scaffolding teams in New Zealand were gangs. Hands down. And they were sought after overseas, and so we lost a lot of them to Australia. But these are hapu and whānau. These people that know how they feed their whānau. Irrespective of other things that may come with it. And then you also have a whariwaka generation where they started making calls and saying, that was dumb when I was a kid, it's different now, I don't want these kids going in this direction. There's a lot of talent, there's a lot of potential, there's leadership, there's all sorts of stuff that are in these institutions. It needs to be channeled. I'd like to see some of our future politicians coming from those backgrounds. And you can say, oh, that's a bit iffy. I could say the same thing around a lot of guys that are sitting in Wellington on chairs, swearing themselves in at the moment.
If you muck around in the business community and you sort of look at small, New Zealand has got its economy is glued together by small businesses, and we have things like Callaghan Innovation that encourages startups and good ideas and stuff like that. If you want to see brilliant ideas and innovation and entrepreneurialism, go into a prison. My God. The ideas these guys come up with to do stuff while they're in prison to make life interesting is phenomenal. It is an absolute ideas farm. That's one of the biggest things that blew my mind.
Not just the survival stuff, but the entertainment stuff, the recreational stuff. It's really
and in terms of the naughtiness that will go on, and how do you scrape together bits of toothbrush and a disposable shaver and some wires that you might have pulled out the back of the radio and make a 3-speed tattoo gun? How do you do that? Sort of thing. And so so many are not in there because they're stupid. They're in there because their entrepreneurialism has been on the wrong side of the line in the sand, sort of thing, and the number comes up.
Or just that they got caught.
That's right. You're in, and I've had many discussions with prisoners where they just admit that they knew they were in with the wrong bunch, but often when you're in that environment, it's bloody hard to get out. And then, the law of averages says your day will come up.
When you get what do you call it, entangled with an excess of evil.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where
like the three-headed beast in Wellington.
In terms of that, harking back to that absolute privilege of knowing, of being brought up by parents that were committed to the children, and then you go into a prison and you meet many lost Māori who don't even know who their parents are, and so it makes you feel pretty stink. Yeah, it's very depressing, because that's not just a small thing. There's tens of thousands, if not hundreds, in that sort of phase where the model is broken, and but we've still got to believe we can get that right. And I think it's got to be more people talking about it like this, and not like the city dump. I don't want it in my backyard. I don't want the prison anywhere near my suburb. And so, this mentality of getting New Zealand back on track, whose track are we talking about? The driveways to the 7 rental homes that you own, or is it actually, the dirt track to the home that's in the worst street of Otara or whatever? And so, it's all very well to get New Zealand back on track in that vision, but that vision is going to suit.
Or the worst street in Whare.
Yeah, true. It's it's so that getting back on track thing. It's not a bad strapline, but it's not a vision that many New Zealanders can actually see.
How do you qualify that statement? It's so open, and that's a cool thing. It makes it work. But if they mean getting back to basic values of human kindness and other things like that, cool. I'm down with that. If they're just talking about productivity, which creates as many problems as it creates problems for others, but some profit out of it. Yeah, I've got a huge problem with that. So when they're saying, what are we getting back to? And I think, like you said, what they're talking about getting back to, maybe an illusion that was generated to make the most of the last, or the second last chance that Wini supporters have to vote. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. These are our kaumātua.
Yeah.
But the scene has changed. What are we doing with the young people? Because that's the future.
Yep.
The Hana Maipi Clark thing, that's fascinating to me because it just is.
Yeah, and I think Winston's...
The Chloe Swarbuck is as a function of the same thing.
Definitely. And Winston's strapline of let's take New Zealand back or something, he backed his words up. He bloody well did. Yep. Like as far as down in Wellington, he appears to be the one that's the dominant in that three-way. What do you call it? Menage sort of thing. That's an interesting sight, but it really...
He's got the best hair, and he always will.
Oh, he's slick.
And I respect
he is
that.
slick. And that's right. I cannot lie. I would never vote for the man, but geez, he's damn good. Damn good.
He's charismatic.
Yep, he is. Absolutely.
He's suave.
Yeah.
We got... as it's been happening lately, a few people watching our show, which is pretty cool. It shows that the live streams are working. Now we live stream on Facebook and YouTube, so we get people connecting in different platforms. And I just want to read some of the comments because we really appreciate the audience joining us. So we have Digideo Norby saying, we will fight all the white man's Bible, the evilbible.com. Time to take over New Zealand. And then Brent says, interesting seeing your Corero free-flowing on here versus LinkedIn, Vaughan. Ehoa.
I'm being stalked.
Time to start our own banking system. MB for Maori, easy cash.
Yeah.
Does your panel thinking the hijacking of words such as genocide and terrorism lacks mana and horopaki with Te Pāti Māori? Does anyone want to...
No, doesn't it lack mana?
No, not at all.
Straight up,
at all.
boom.
Yep.
And then...
It may annoy and it may offend people, but I don't think it makes next mana. We're not using it lightly when we talk about things. I think we're doing it with... Done a bit of research, done a bit of chat.
Yeah.
Don't feel that it's inappropriate.
And just on Te Pāti Māori, if we back the bus up to when Rawiri and Deb first arrived there, a lot of people couldn't get their head around what they were trying to achieve in Parliament. They a lot of it was kind of like out there, and I even struggled. But I think the two of them have evolved well in the 3 years, and are in terms of they have rounded themselves up, and they've really polished their act.
Well, they've evolved well because they've stayed true to who they are, where they come from, what they are. Everything else, it's a bag of stones, and it's going to polish the edges and stuff. That will just come by nature of being in that combative environment and stuff like that, but they have core values and those will never be compromised.
Yeah. And in terms of the entertainment that is politics, I mean, Te Pāti Māori is the excitement machine. Yeah, the other stuff looks like donkeys by comparison. No disrespect to those parties, but there's that thoroughbred look about Te Pāti Māori. They are match fit for the purpose that they're there in terms of representing that movement. And I think that in terms of that,
it's a much better annual conference to go to. Be better singing, better banter, better kite, better everything.
Oh, and that beautiful Māori black humour, in terms of it's kind of like, we just, there is a way, and so that's the celebratory thing, and that's what I go back before about the rest of the world when they look at New Zealand, and already with the repealing of the smoke-free laws and stuff like that, we're getting attention around the world for probably not the best reasons right now, but when you look at the profile of Māori, it stands out, and so, as Takata Ferris keeps saying, we ain't going away. We ain't going away. And that is, so true.
But even that black humour thing that you're mentioning, that's the humour of the Irish. Self-deprecation is a great thing. It keeps you humble. And if you can't keep yourself humble, your family certainly will and your relations certainly will.
Yeah.
And they can be as merciless as you like at a certain point, and then you'll sit down and have a kai and it's okay.
Yeah. And that's, that self-deprecating thing in terms of races in history that have been smashed. Same with the Jews. You embed in the Jewish community, and their humour is kind of like out there, man. The Irish
of Jewish stand-up comics.
Yeah. They just, they are sort of the global unicorns of comedy, and but Māori, there is just that magic about us. So one of the things is that 10 years ago we couldn't have done this podcast and talk topically, mainly dominating Māori all night, and had an audience. Probably it would have just been kind of like too out there, and it just goes to show how far we've come, that this is the kōrero. And tonight has not been about criticising the government. It's actually been talking about what we will stand up for, what we stand for.
We've also I think we've been suggesting ways that the government could be more effective to serve the community that voted it in, and the ones that didn't vote it in, because they're there for everybody, not just the people that voted them in, not just the people that finance their campaigns, the official ones and the unofficial ones. They're there to feed the whānau. That's it.
Yeah, and so the sort of the amazing miracle of the great migration to New Zealand and Māori for 183 years under Te Tiriti.
The great miracle, the great myth. Or what? But we can say it happened. It didn't happen. But the thing is, those are details you can disagree on, but we can all say we were there and now we're here.
Well, to me, the miracle I sort of look at is, I remember one day standing on Otaki Beach and there was a raging storm coming and foam blowing off the waves, and I was thinking, our ancestors got through that. That's the miracle of, so that resilience to probably didn't happen on the first crack, the third crack, or the fourth or whatever, but we are here, and that's the same with what's happened today. That we, the relentless pursuit of sticking with it. And that's why you said that, there's something that resonates with me about that, to not think in evolutionary terms is to not think at all. It's that, how do we tutu with this and find a way? So Te Tiriti might sort of resemble in some regards a bit of a Rubik's Cube, but we're going to crack it. We really are. And rather than, the current suggestion is, we don't want that toy anymore, let's write a check and do another one. And that's kind of the insulting thing of they're expecting us to fraudulently adulterate our birth certificate. Try and be something that you're not. We know who we are, and we know that, sure, when our ancestors signed Te Tiriti, if they were here today, they'd go far out. We didn't expect that was going to be the outcome, but that doesn't mean that you give up. And that's the beauty of it all.
Also, that idea of inbuilt obsolescence in an appliance or in something like a founding document. That's a travesty. That's a travesty at Waitangi.
Yeah, and so the drivers behind this referendum and why, the fact that, I'm sure the Prime Minister will be regretting that it's on the table, because it's actually not good distraction. It's, people are focusing on the failure, and so the sooner they can get it off the table, and the courage to stand up and say, we got that one completely wrong. Sorry, David, it's not going to happen. treaties all over. That doesn't mean we're all good and we're all one nation, but it means that all of a sudden we've got an agreement that we go back to the treaty, and how do we make that work? It's that commitment, because that's more to me the point of we are partners. Yep. And so we've got too many people in New Zealand that, the ceding of the sovereignty and the not believing it's a partnership. That's probably a generation of people that the sooner they're not on the planet, and we've got fresh thinkers coming through, that will be good for New Zealand. And that's why I look at the young. They don't carry that chip on their shoulder.
That phenomenon is also a consequence of the type of education those people received at the time. They're products of their times, but the bottom line is 2030-ish chiefs signed the English language version of the treaty, and it said ceding of sovereignty, blah, 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 whether they understood the English or not, but 500 plus chiefs didn't. They signed Māori language versions, and people can say, no, all they want to. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We read in English, we read in Māori. International law backs the language of the indigenous people, and that the case, and people can not like it, well, cool, don't like it, but it doesn't change the truth, doesn't change the facts.
And when Māori names first started getting slapped up on particularly government departments, but even a lot of private businesses were paying squillions to get, to make it look like we're down, with iwi and all that sort of stuff. I was really anti that, because I thought, how could you have a Māori name and not walk it in your organisation? But I must admit that if you put it up there, and then you got a generation of kids coming through, and that's all they see, in 25 years from now, that is the norm for them. Whereas, we've got people who still think that, like, for example, corrections is araputama. One day that will just be the name. And I think so there's almost like you've got to give up 25 years of slugging it out in the trenches to get that tipping point of getting over. And I do believe that's where we were. So this pulling it back and stripping the signs down, or whatever's going to happen, is, it's a bad look.
I think the potential for good and built in the Māori names of those departments and stuff like that, it's easier for people to write it off because people don't relate to Latin being used in English language the same way that they did because of the way education is gone. But Māori similar to Latin in the way that if you look at the root of the name, the concept behind it, the story or the myth that usually goes with it, there's a whole lot of goodness. It actually makes things easier. It doesn't make it harder. But I'm willing to put my cards on the table and say that most New Zealanders of European descent now aren't particularly familiar with the classics, what they call their own culture, whether you can argue whether it is or not, but the stuff that was part and parcel of church-based education, which is Europe since, we'll pick a century, pre and post the Crusades, people just don't get certain, even that we throw around words like genius, muse, things like that, but people forget about the kōrero or the pūrākau that go with it. Whereas for many people, Raukawa, your people have been really, really good at it, at making sure people remember those stories where families may have lost contact with that stuff. And what's different for us, when we talk about archetypal god figures or deities or people in those mythologies, we can whakapapa to them, and it's not that far back in there by our reckoning. And you can say it's rubbish, whether you believe it literally or you take it figuratively, that's a very, very close association. So, if people aren't in a place to be receptive to appreciate the goodness that's in stuff, and the vast majority of people may never appreciate it, but you'll get certain ones that'll plug in, and that's your bang, bang, bang. It's important.
And, in terms of the referendum discussion is dominated this evening, but I think one of the key things for me is that the party that proposed the idea, their follower base, the 200,000 voters that voted for them in October, I would suspect that 99% of that voter base wouldn't be able to recite to you the articles. They don't understand what the treaty is, but they just don't want it.
Good chance they've never read it.
No, that's right. And so going back to that education thing, that's what makes it wrong. If you don't understand it, what actually are you protesting about?
The way we deliver stuff, like in a modern enlightened education system, supposedly we do treaty, kids know about treaty, they'll tell you, we don't want to learn that, we already know that. I know they don't, because the way we deliver stuff in the education system, the way it is pretty mediocre and pretty not cool. There are exceptions.
Yeah.
I'm not dissing and slagging all things, but like you said, there's a generational turnover when stuff, what's fresh now won't be accepted for a generation, and by then it's kind of stale and crusty.
Yeah, and Leo, you mentioned that someone said, free kōrero versus LinkedIn. It's classic. If we had this kōrero on LinkedIn, someone would come and go, oh yeah, but you fellas ate all the Moriori's.
Yeah. I was thinking about bringing
God,
that up.
I got a live one here. It's like seriously. So there's still that type of primate wandering the earth. In terms of that thinks that way. Mm-hmm. And you go, you poor
guys,
bugger.
Just to clear that, because we get that in our socials quite often, the Moriori excuse. Why it doesn't stand? What's up with that argument? I'm coming from a completely place of ignorance. Why people use that argument and why it doesn't stand?
Well, Brandon will probably have something to add, but my first thing is that anything to put a question mark around that we were here first, anything in terms of that we are, tangata whenua. And so anything that can put a question mark around
to
that.
delegitimise.
That's right. So it's trying to undermine that Māori, there's even some
Because if you were at first, then it's okay that we're doing something now. Now, if European ascendancy in this country in terms of political power came because of military might, you can argue that's true, and all sorts of other things, and the ability to resource and stuff like that at a certain time in our history is valid, then it's also totally valid and okay for me to rustle up 40 or 50 relations that wear patches and may do things illegally to generate income to feed their families, and buy a cul-de-sac in Hāhei and move in and do things that put people off, so their real estate values drop, buy them up cheap, do them up, and then they sell them on, and this happened in the North Shore in the 80s. It was a system. It was a really well-run system.
Gentrification.
Or else we could... I'm hoping that we've become a bit more evolved from those primates, and we're another type of primate, because if you say might is right, then that just means if my kid's bigger and tougher than your kid and smashes them at school, then you got to be okay with that.
Yeah. Because
they're basically, when you break it down to it, you're saying violence is okay, and I think most people have gotten to a point now where we all say violence ain't okay. We both come from, we have warrior lineages and stuff like that, but in this day and age, there's a place for it, and it's about that big, and rugby field's a good place to work that out, and so is the netball court and a couple of other places, and besides that, no thank you, because it's not sustainable. It doesn't feed a community. Sooner or later, when you said, do you think it'll get to a point where blood could be spilt? Bloody hope not, because we're such a tiny village of a country. That would be incredibly tragic, but I think it's been close to that many, many times, because people don't understand how, if you're the bear in the cage that's been poked every day for 183, 184 years, it gets really tired really quick. Yeah. And then if you've got, your relations or your brother or your sister that have just had a little bit too much and maybe not quite, maybe a sandwich short of a picnic or something, not hard to turn. But I suspect if it ever came to that bloodshed scenario, I think it would be an artificially manufactured situation.
By possibly the
either
other
by
side.
The other side or someone on our side, by some kind of fringe-dwelling dickhead that we don't need that. We really don't. We don't want another Christchurch mosque situation.
Spot on.
That's what was wrong with this campaign and this election. You can play with some things, but there's some stuff it's just better to keep away from it.
That's right.
You don't know.
Yeah. So I don't believe blood will be spilt. I believe that this is going to be a sophisticated resistance.
We're a civilised society.
Yeah, that's right. So Māori will show that we're beyond that. If blood is spilt, and don't want to sort of like suggest a conspiracy theory, it will come from something along the lines of white supremacy or something, trying to, throw the whole thing into disarray.
Who have been identified as the main threat to internal security in this country since day dot. Go to the United States, if you look at school shootings, what's the profile of that person? They're a white male, they're of a certain age. Often they've got a bit of religion in their background, a bit of repression or suppression in their upbringing, and it comes out, but it tends not to work in us. The other thing also is that people forget that people can look at Rawiri and he'll say something and say, oh, that's terrible, that it sets me a lot. He's a minister. He's a Christian minister of the Ringatua Church. You got to remember, the face you see with the tāmoko and stuff, there's a lot to people that, and we're making fun of Winnie and David and Chris. if this was a bunch of Māoris in the family thing, we'd be taking the piss out of ourselves and our own
Harder,
relations more
yeah.
than anyone else. It's just, this is an opportunity to voice something that mainstream ears may not be used to hearing. So we're making the most of the opportunity. But I like what local kaumātua Joe Davis has said. Most of the projects he's run in the time that I've been in the series just said everything we do, say, think and feel should be founded in this quarter that his parents' generation spoke about and his grandparents thrashed, and it became a part of who he is, and it's in his DNA. He aroha ki te tangata. And that comes out of 2 Luke, and it's from the night supposedly when the Christ child was born, the angel, and it's just peace on earth. It's just that goodwill to all mankind. In other words, don't be a dick, be kind.
And the other reason why I'm pretty confident that things won't go two tits up in terms of the resistance around the referendum is that New Zealand politically has always been very paranoid about how the rest of the world sees us. We're kind of like the little unicorn of the South Pacific and the rock star economy, and we're loved by all. We don't want to be
arrogant with it sometimes. Sometimes I kind of like our Australian cousins because they'll just say the damn thing and they don't give a shit what you think. And there's a lot, and I think a lot of that's because of their Irish DNA.
And so I can't see our government going to APEC or some, heads of government meeting, and they're getting shit from the other leaders there going, how's that little civil war going on in New Zealand? Therefore Māori are running rings around you fellas, sort of thing. I think that we can pull the handbrake on the operational side of New Zealand in a way that no blood will be spilled, but there'll be a point where we're going to have to come to the table and sort this out. And that's the key thing.
We're such a small, if you're pro-treaty, you can't be about race wars. Or ideological wars.
That's
what you can be about is, bro, really? Bro, that's about as far as it will go. And we've been saying that for 180 plus years. And it's, it can be painful, but each generation is just being, bro, really? Don't be a dick, don't be a dick, don't be a dick, don't be a dick, don't be a dick.
So that's the beautiful thing, that 180 years later, Te TIRITI is actually centre of stage, because there is a community that are prepared to look after it. It's taonga, and we're guardians. We're going to look after it.
And we still we have a way in their own language, in their own thinking and practice of, we can enshrine something and think of it as a sacred something or other, but we can still take the piss out of it, like Irish taking the Mickey out of the Roman Catholic Church. You could argue that it's the most important part of what makes someone Irish, but that gives you every right to give it, to test it, to be, to put it through its trials and stuff. And treaty's a bit like that with us. And also, the treaty's not a Māori thing; it's an everybody thing, and that's the whole point. We're not saying treaty me. We're saying treaty us, bro. Treaty us.
I got a couple of more messages here. So, Maria says, if you know, and I mean know the history, there is no need for context. Systematic histories of displacing Māori and attempts to ethnically cleanse us are exercises of terrorism. The colonization of Māori was a terrorist attack on the indigenous body and soul.
By an occupation government.
Kia ora, Maria. And then Ian Thorne. Hey, kia ora, Ian. Kia ora, Korua. It was Korua? Am I saying it right?
Yeah,
Kia ora, Korua?
Yeah. Spot on.
Kia ora, Korua. It was fantastic to see so many protesting so soon. How soon do we need to be full-on occupying and boycotting and marching against this government, given the speed at which they are changing and killing policies is intended to make it possible to fight all issues? I think now, before they stoke the hate and cause bloodshed. That's what they want, and you're right. They will use white power. Displacement and cancellation of culture, bad, but it's not terrorism, is the first degree. Wise up, Brandon. Brent is engaging in the conversation as well. We appreciate all the korero and the different points of views. That's what we're all about. So thanks everyone for commenting. Before I forget, tell me about Tōtika. Because last time we missed it, so please.
Do you mean tell you about this shameless plug on my t-shirt?
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to say, a couple of times I've said about, the to not think in evolutionary terms. In terms of, this is the number plate on my truck out in the car park, and when I was putting the plate on that truck, which was 7, 8 years ago now. Firstly, you've got to have a 6-letter word, right? So you're looking for something with 6 letters. But more seriously, because I was using the truck to go to places that probably normal vehicles won't go, there was the straight ahead component. And a part of my personal journey was, regardless of all obstacles, I want to get to where I'm going. So that was the most basic, fundamental meaning of Tōtika, was the straight ahead, the true north, and you know, the true sort of side of it. But like most Māori words, the depth of meaning tends to evolve as you kind of have it with you and you carry it with you. So, you know, Tōtika for me is actually a taonga, and I think it's a Winiata thing where we'll often take something and then play with it, tutu with it, and it becomes our own, and it's kind of like a little bit unrecognisable to what it originally was, but it's ours. And that's what...
but its essence is but it's still itself.
Yeah, that's right.
The essence is still the same.
So my backstory is my backstory, and I suppose that, you know, the Japanese have kaisan, but in terms of excellence, you know, to me, the standards that I set for myself, and I had a great kōrero with a really good friend today, and sort of we got to the point where I was saying, how do I express, particularly with work behind the wire in the prisons, a house of excellence, standards where tikanga best practice can sit inside the operational excellence of an effective prison. And we came up with this, with you know, he whare pono Tōtika, you know, a house of excellence. But that house of excellence is not this physical house. It's more, this is the house. It's terms of how do you walk it, you know, how do you think it, and what is that? And so I think that the word has evolved as I've evolved. And, you know, for most of us that have been in relationships that are longer, I was sort of thinking about, if only I knew what I know today in my 6th decade, in my 2nd or 3rd, and, you know, you get married, and the woman that you marry at 20 is not the woman that you've married when she's 30, 40, 50. You know, you've got this attractive image that you're allured to, and you marry it. And then all of a sudden there are children, and there's career drive, and there's personal development. And so are you both evolving at the same rate? And you know, sometimes not, and relationships come to an end. But that to me is the you know, the true essence of a great relationship, is that ability to evolve together. And so I think that that's the evolutionary thinking, is that your self-drive still has to function in the rest of the world, you know. And I think that so in essence, the you know, the passage of time between being born and being and dying, the short time we get here, which is miraculous, I feel that at the age of 61, that I've got probably 2 decades left to draw on and glean from what I picked up in the first 6. And so probably to me, I honestly feel like I'm going to peak when I'm around 70. And so carrying Tōtika with me is, it almost hangs above my head like the sword of Damocles. It tests me every time I look at that word. I go, have I walked it today? Have I truly been that? And there's days where I drop the ball, truly, you know. It's not like, you know, I am this walking unicorn of Tōtika. It's just that it resonates with me. It's a reminder of that straight up excellence that you set for yourself, because you can't expect it or demand it of others until you truly know that you are it. And so you know, that's really it. So that evolving of the word will continue to do that, you know, but that's where it's at today, on this great day in New Zealand when Māori have come together.
It's a pepeha.
Yeah.
It's a mission statement.
Yeah. And
it also means to be erect, straight. It also means your rights. It's funny if you're working in corrections and it's on a license plate looking thing. I don't know if prisoners make license plates in this country, but that's why I know about license plates, because I watch American movies.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. And tika is the root word for tikanga, custom. Doing things right.
Yeah.
So that it's in harmony with things. It also goes against that Western, I don't even know if it's a Western thing or an Anglo-Saxon thing, where man alone against everything in the world, doing it the right way. Yeah. Tōtika for Māori males means doing the right thing as a male with the fun.
Yeah, and you know, in terms of using, if we're speaking in the English, you know, if we use the 2 words to validate and to verify, often if you're auditing, say for example, you're buying a business, right? And you go, that's a cafe, I know it's a cafe. that validates that it's a cafe. However, to verify whether it's a going concern, you will look at the balance sheet, you look at the P&L, you'll look at the database and that and go, it's losing money or it's making money, but I can now verify whether it's a good or a bad business. Altbays, we can see it on TikTok and go, I know Altbays, so I can validate that Altbays is a podcast. I'm sitting in this amazing studio, with two dudes, and we're having a kōrero with Taylor on the production desk. I can verify this is hard out, a successful podcast in an awesome studio that would have Joe Rogan shivering in his shoes.
Excellent food from Base Pizza.
Yes.
A shameless plug for Altbays, sort of thing. Yeah, so it's that also from a Tōtika perspective is that, your puku will tell you something that like, I need to look at this closer. I do like the look of what I'm sounding, what I'm hearing. So that ability to verify, and Pipiha verifies, it's like, and so this is, in terms of verification, Te TIRITI verifies, it is our birth certificate. It is hard out.
It's logos.
It's logos.
Yeah, truly. Yeah.
Got it.
So thanks for that, bro. It's
man,
you can send me an invoice for allowing me to plug Tōtika on your podcast.
We will. Thank you very much. So if people want to get in touch and find out more about what you guys are doing, what would be the easiest way? Is it LinkedIn or you have a website or something?
I don't use a website anymore. I find LinkedIn and probably Altbays.
Sounds good. Get in touch with us and we will redirect the message.
Yeah, hard out. Yeah,
cool.
Awesome.
Guys, okay, so just before we wrap it up, just some thank yous and shout outs. So first of all, Fred, Peninsula Motel, thanks again for making sure that our guests rest easy and comfortable here in Whitianga. All good? Did you get to
Do you know,
Fred?
Fred's a bit of a legend. I pulled up in my truck and he's out getting the rubbish bin and he goes, room 15, he just knew it was me. And and that's true Kiwi hospitality. Yeah, so awesome. Room unlocked, everything was ready to go. Yeah. So very cool. And it's nice to go to a motel where you're not having to log in with your own app to use Netflix or anything like that. It's all there, boom, on the screen. So, go Fred.
Peninsula Motel. So if you are coming to the Coromandel for the holidays, make sure to check them out. They have this classic vintage style, but the rooms are tidy, beautiful, all pretty modern actually, but they have that cool look. I love it because we had Mellow Downs a couple of weeks ago, last week, and he was saying that. He was like, there's this vintage look, but the rooms are perfect.
Classic cars, classic ambience.
There you go. So make sure to
pristine environment, well, as pristine as it gets in the present climate.
There you go. Yeah. PeninsulaMotel.co.nz. We had them on the screen during the show, so make sure to check them out. It will be busy in the Coromandel, so make sure to book it as soon as you can. And also, of course, Bay's Pizzeria. Shout out to our bro Henry. Came as a guest. It was cool because he came to the studio because he really wanted to meet Mellow Downs. We had a rap session. They were having a chat, and then Henry came as a guest on our show as well because he really wants to be a co-host. I know that.
And I got to give a shout out to those pizzas because, as you know, I'm carnivore diet, so I crossed from the dark side back to eat carbs. And so they were worth eating.
I checked.
You did. Yeah. No, I thought.
Was it worth it?
Yeah. So it was worth falling off the wagon. Yeah, and eating carbs tonight. Awesome.
There you go. So make sure to check them on the socials. and we had our bro here playing the bass. We're on to it, Brandon. So make sure to check them out. Bass.fiti if you are on the socials. And amazing. It's not only pizzas, by the way. It's classic Italian cuisine. So the bro is on to it. Make sure to check them out. And of course, I cannot forget two last things. The Coro Classic happening on the 6th of January.
Look at that.
And there's a cool collab happening between the Coro Classic, Altbays, and Coromind. Hillary Emerson took the double pass. We're going to give more information on our socials. Congratulations, Hillary. Thanks for your message. We're going to do another one on Thursday. It's a very, very, very special show on Thursday with Mr. Alan Rhodes, one of the most respected potters in the area, and also bluegrass classic musician. And we're gonna have Stu Pidley co-hosting the show. They're gonna have a jam. They're getting ready. I know, right? Man, goddamn, Altbays, man, it's just going. But anyway, the Koro Classic, 6th of January. Make sure to check them out. We're giving tickets every week, my friends. So if you wanna join the Altbays crew and come to the festival, we love Sublime with Rome, but the lineup, it's pretty solid. A lot of cool DJs. Yeah, man. So this is gonna be fun. And of course, I have to do this. Here we go. Look at this one. Koro Minds, January 2022. Nick Berry. February, Hannah Coleman Smith.
Nice.
March, Peter Augustine.
Laku laku.
April, Emma Evangeline Gustafson.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Lara Gay. Wow, I love this cover, man.
Yeah.
This is powerful. Lara Gay. Oh, can I grab that one, please, my friends? JT Tōtika, the man who did all this beautiful work on the Altbays Studios with Taylor. So make sure to check the bros' work. Hollywood on Instagram. June. Monique Rush, July.
There's some amazing art in there, man.
Rachel Olsen, August.
Not a boring, glossy corporate
No.
magazine. It's organic and local, like craft beer
Yeah!
or homemade kombucha.
I love this one here. I love this one here. We got more, but anyway, Dave Fowl. Shane Walker, Waihi Beach.
Oh, that's a beauty.
And my bro,
Yeah.
Roy Mata, you are a legend. This is
Yeah.
our latest.
That's awesome.
That's yours,
That
by
is
the way.
awesome.
That's
Yeah.
yours, by the way. Roy Mata, thank you so much, my bro. And this is a community project, okay? The community sends us stories, a lot of storytelling, and we're all about supporting local artists. So if you want to see your work on the magazine, your story, or if you are one of those cool businesses that keep the project alive, make sure to reach out. Advertisement works in Koro Minds because the magazines are beautiful, so they stay in establishments for a long time. They're not
Acting
recycling.
locally, thinking globally.
I know. There you go. And if you are not from the Coromandel, but still you want to read more and know more about these beautiful artists and the community, you can access korominds.nz, read the online version, or listen, because accessibility matters, so we also care for the audio version of the mag.
So really, it's a home kill magazine, isn't it?
Hey, man.
Nice,
Hey.
nice.
And we make use of all the parts of the animal. There's no waste here, that's for sure. You taking this one here, my friends?
Awesome.
Roy Mata's one.
Good about.
We'll check the collection if
Yep.
you have them all. What a pleasure, my friends. Wow.
Hey, bro.
How do you guys say? Korero. I love it. Korero. Korero.
But also, I'm blown away by the new studio, man.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Cool, eh?
I mean, coming up here tonight, it was like, man, I'm driving into the Hollywood Hills. There's like, Leo's doing good on the coast.
Centennial Hills.
Yeah.
Centennial Hills. Centennial Hills.
It's
Thanks,
awesome.
man.
Awesome. Yeah.
Frederick Pokai sent you a big hug. I was talking to him last
Frederick's
night.
great. Kia ora, Fred. Yeah.
Kia ora,
awesome.
Fred. Oh, he's actually on the mag. He wrote a cool piece about his journey from arts to look. Check this out.
Oh, wow.
From film.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So, Brandon, my friend, always a pleasure.
Kia ora.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the clay. It was lovely. Thank you, Base Pizzas.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Shout out.
Yeah.
What
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Taylor.
Yeah.
The boss.
Thanks, Taylor. Awesome, bro.
It's always
Always-
about the people in the kitchen.
There you go.
That's right. Ring
Vaughan,
a winner.
always on to it. Thank you so much for coming
Hey.
and seeing us.
Just a privilege to be here, man. You really, really enjoyed it. Yeah.
We'll
great
bring it
cordial.
back. You can
Yeah.
see where it's going, eh?
Absolutely.
We'll
yeah,
bring it
great
back.
journey. Awesome.
Rock
Kia
and
ora, bro.
roll.
All right.
Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora. And
Yep.
for you watching us, remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now we live stream on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok. We post all the clips, the short clips, the long clips on our socials every day. There's a lot of cool content there. I'll see you on Thursday. Ka
Nice.
kite.
O Māori e.
Mate wā.